Gaugamela, September 331 BC. The roar of the men began to quiet after the stirring words of their great leader. The hot summer wind swept through Alexander's hair as he sat tall in his saddle. His horse, excited by the clamor and the smell of sweat, snorted and stamped the ground. Alexander glanced back at the long lines of his phalanx infantry, pride swelling in his chest as he surveyed the disciplined ranks. The noon sun gleamed off their polished armor as they stood in nervous anticipation, awaiting his command. Beside him, Hephaestion and his other most trusted companions sat astride their horses, silently observing. Though they knew the odds were grim, they were outnumbered nearly 3-1, they had witnessed their commander perform battlefield miracles before. Trust in Alexander was absolute. As the lion banner snapped in the wind, Alexander donned his lion-shaped helm, prepared to lead his army into the most crucial battle of their lives. The forces of Macedonia had been building toward this moment for years. Twice already, they had faced and routed the armies of Darius. At Issus, in November 333 BC, Alexander and his men had decimated an army commanded by Darius himself. Though the Persian king had escaped, the defeat had shattered his forces' morale. Now, the Lion of Macedonia would strike at the heart of the empire, Babylon itself. The men were well rested after their time in Egypt, where they had been embraced by the people of the son. Alexander, ever a student, had visited sacred sites and consulted Egyptian seers, absorbing all he could. Despite his countless victories, Darius still sought to buy Alexander off, offering him riches and lands, but the Macedonian king had no interest in bargains. He intended to topple the empire that had once enslaved Greece. By April, it was time to muster the forces and march deep into Persia's heartlands. Alexander, always a meticulous planner, ensured that his men were well fed and supplied during the long trek. He loved and respected them, not merely as soldiers but as brothers. Darius, believing Alexander would march along the Euphrates, had prepared traps, poisoned water, and ambushes along the river. But Alexander, always the strategist, crossed to the Tigris instead, outmaneuvering his foe. When Darius learned of this, he scrambled to muster every available man, some say as many as 140,000, a vast force of cavalry and infantry. His loyal general, Macedonia, led the elite heavy cavalry to intercept Alexander at the Tigris, but by the time they arrived, the Macedonians had already established defenses. All Macedonia could do was watch, unable to attack. Darius positioned his forces on a wide-open plain near a village called Gaugamela, perfect ground for his scythed chariots to tear through Alexander's men if he could hold them on the flats. But Alexander's forces were already on the move, and when Macedonia attempted to hold a hill overlooking the battlefield, Alexander's men flanked him. Outnumbered and cornered, Macedonia ordered a retreat, abandoning the hill. Alexander laughed aloud, watching the once mighty Persian general flee. He knew Darius would be furious at the loss of the defensive position. Now, with the high ground secured, Alexander's men made camp in full view of the enemy. They set guards as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Alexander ordered extra rations for his soldiers. He spent the evening in quiet contemplation, praying to Zeus. The battle of their lives awaited at dawn. Parmenion, Alexander's second-in-command, argued for a night attack. With only 40,000 men against Darius's vast host, it seemed a safer option. But Alexander, confident in his plan, refused. He would use the battlefield to his advantage, as he always did. All night, Darius's army stood in their ranks, exhausted but unwilling to abandon their fortified positions. The sun rose, hot and blinding, and Alexander allowed his men time to wake and prepare at their leisure. His scouts kept close watch on the enemy below, whose soldiers, having stood all night in formation, were nearly collapsing from fatigue. By noon, Alexander was ready. He ordered his men into position. The Persian army, a staggering mass of 30,000 cavalry, hundreds of scythed chariots, and 10,000 elite immortal guards, stretched across the plains. Behind them, an unruly horde of infantry from the many Persian satrapies waited. Alexander could even see war elephants in the far rear. His forces were smaller but more disciplined. On the left flank, Parmenion commanded the elite Thessalian cavalry, while Alexander himself led the companion cavalry on the right. The center was a wall of steel, a phalanx bristling with sarissas. Behind them stood the hypaspists, armed with javelins, ready to support the phalanx. Alexander rode back and forth along the lines, inspiring his men with words of courage. Then, with a cry, he gave the signal. His companion cavalry surged forward, pushing toward the Persian flank. Forced to respond, Darius sent 15,000 cavalry charging to meet them. The thunder of hooves and the clash of steel filled the air as Alexander's elite horsemen smashed into the Persian ranks. Blood flowed as horses screamed and men died, but Alexander's companion cavalry, though outnumbered, were among the best warriors in the world. They fought like lions, cutting down their enemies with brutal efficiency. Darius, seeing the carnage on his left, ordered the scythed chariots forward. They hurtled toward the phalanx, their deadly blades spinning. But the Macedonian soldiers, trained for this moment, simply parted their ranks, allowing the chariots to pass before raining javelins down on them, rendering them useless. Frustration growing, Darius sent his right flank charging into Parmenian's the Salians. The fighting was fierce, and Parmenian's men suffered heavy losses, but they held their ground. Then, Darius saw what he thought was a weakness. Alexander had continued pushing his forces further to the right, creating what appeared to be a gap in the center of the Macedonian line. Desperate to break through, Darius ordered his immortal guard to charge into the breach. The elite soldiers rushed forward, howling in triumph. But it was exactly what Alexander had been waiting for. With a roar that shook the heavens, Alexander and his companions broke from the flank and charged straight at Darius, cutting through the Persian lines like a storm of wrath. Covered in the blood of fallen enemies, his eyes burning with rage for the years of Persian oppression, Alexander was a force of nature. His sword flashed as he hacked through the fleeing Persian soldiers, his fury focused on the hated king. There, amidst the chaos and slaughter, Alexander's gaze locked on Darius. The Persian king, once the most powerful man in the world, was now a fleeing figure, desperate to escape. Years of rage, hatred for the suffering Persia had inflicted on Greece, surged through Alexander as he screamed a battle cry that echoed across the battlefield. His men followed, driven by the same fury, the same burning desire for vengeance. Alexander's horse surged forward, hooves thundering, as he closed in on Darius. The blue-blooded king fled east, terror in his eyes. "I will chase you to the ends of the earth," Alexander bellowed, his voice filled with the rage of generations. But Darius slipped away, slipping from his grasp like a coward. Alexander, furious, turned his attention back to the battle. With their king gone, the Persian army collapsed. The once great empire crumbled before his eyes. In the aftermath, 40,000 Persians lay dead or dying, while Alexander had lost fewer than 1,000 men. Gaugamela would forever be remembered as one of the greatest tactical victories in history, but for Alexander, it was only the beginning. The gates of Babylon now stood wide open, and the Lion of Macedonia was ready to claim his prize. Much more to come. Like and subscribe.